So I urge my colleagues to vote yes. All of my colleagues, I thank Mr. Connolly for working with me on this measure. And now I'll recognize our ranking member, Mr. McCaul of Texas, for any remarks he might have.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today our committee will mark up 10 measures. I'd like to first focus on a few of the good bipartisan bills and resolutions that committee Republicans and Democrats have worked on together. I fully support the Palestinian International Terrorism Support Prevention Act introduced by Mr. Mast, which would impose sanctions on those like Iran who provide support to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hamas is a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization that has killed more than 400 Israelis and 25 American citizens since 1993. Earlier this year, Hamas launched more than 600 rockets into Israel in a single weekend, resulting in 4 civilian casualties, including an American citizen. This legislation requires the administration to sanction any individuals determined to support Hamas. If you support a terrorist group that kills civilians, you should be subject to U.S. sanctions. It's just that simple. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Mr. Deutsch, Mr. Wilson, for introducing the United States-Israel Cooperation Enhancement and Regional Security Act. This is a comprehensive bipartisan bill that updates our civil and security cooperation with Israel. Specifically, it reauthorizes our security assistance to Israel and updates existing law to ensure we can quickly supply Israel with defense articles in an emergency. We will also be considering a bipartisan resolution introduced by Representatives Schneider and Zeldin opposing efforts to delegitimize the state of Israel and condemning the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS movement. The BDS movement unfairly targets Israel with economic, cultural, and academic boycotts. I'm proud to support this measure, although I would have preferred that the committee consider my comprehensive bill, H.R. 336, which includes actual policy provisions to help the United States combat BDS, in addition to sanctions on Assad and assistance for Israel and Jordan. While over 171 Democrats support the resolution we are considering today, none have signed the discharge petition to bring my bill to the floor for a vote. I would encourage any colleagues that would be interested to go one step further in support of Israel and sign the petition. Mr. Chairman, I'm also disappointed that while we are considering many bipartisan measures here today, we are also considering House Resolution 326, a one-sided take on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It goes out of its way to rebuke the current administration's nascent peace efforts and blames Israel for undermining the peace process. It does not mention the Palestinian Authority's practice of paying individuals who commit acts of terrorism. It adds nothing positive to the conversation, and what it does do is antagonize one of our closest partners while undermining this administration's ongoing efforts. And therefore, I must oppose that resolution. And lastly, I'm concerned with the Safeguard Our Elections and Combat Unlawful Interference in Our Democracy Act. Let me begin by saying I want to put my record on being tough on Russia against anyone's in Congress. I voted for CATSA, which authorizes sanctions for the 2016 interference. I voted against the delisting of Russia earlier this year, but this bill needs to be refined. As written, this legislation is more about politics and policy, and it seems to ignore the substantial actions taken by both Congress and the administration, not to mention the millions of dollars spent investigating Russian interference. The administration has sanctioned 18 people under CATSA, and the Department of Justice secured indictments during the Mueller probe for 12 Russian nationals, all for attempted interference in the 2016 election. In fact, for the past 3 years, the American people have heard more about Russian meddling in our 2016 elections more than any other issue out of Washington. To require another review of that action now would redirect resources for political purposes that should be used to prevent these types of attacks in the future. So I urge my colleagues to support the Burchett Amendment so that we can have a forward-looking bipartisan bill that will authorize action against those who attempt to interfere in future federal elections. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I'm aware of only one amendment to this measure.
Mr. Chairman,